The last time Dr. Naomi Thompson saw both her daughters smiling together was on a warm Thursday afternoon in the spring of 1992. The air in Macon, Georgia, carried the thick scent of blooming azaleas, and the streets were filled with the golden blur of school buses winding their way through the neighborhood. That day, 8-year-old Aliyah and Amira, identical twins with big brown eyes and matching pink swim caps, had begged their mother to let them skip swimming class. Naomi, in her usual calm but firm tone, reminded them of the importance of commitment, of facing challenges. She had no idea that behind their sudden reluctance hid something deeper, something unspeakable, something sinister. Summit Pines Aquatic Center was the pride of Macon's North End, a state-of-the-art sports facility boasting the most advanced indoor pools in the county. Families flocked there every week, eager to enroll their children in programs coached by former athletes and decorated trainers. Among them was Brian Calloway, a tall, soft-spoken instructor with a reputation for turning timid kids into confident swimmers. Parents trusted him, kids listened to him, but some of them, especially little girls, feared him in ways they couldn't articulate. Naomi had sensed something shift in her girls weeks before that day. Amira had become quieter, taking longer to get dressed for class. Aliyah began clinging to her mother's arm just a little longer than usual before heading to the pool. When asked what was wrong, they'd just shake their heads. "Coach Brian says we need to be tougher," Amira had whispered one night while Naomi tucked her in. "He says crying is for losers." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Did he hurt you, baby?" Amira didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. Naomi brought it up with Marcus, her husband, a respected high school English teacher who always approached life with logic. "You're reading too much into it," he had said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The girls are just tired. Sports can be stressful, that's all." Naomi wasn't convinced, but she didn't want to cause panic. She promised herself that if she saw one more red flag, she would act. That moment never came, because the very next day, Amira disappeared. It was March the 13th, a Friday. Naomi arrived home from the clinic around 6:10 p.m. to find Aliyah standing in the hallway, still in her damp swimsuit, shivering and crying uncontrollably. "Where's your sister?" Naomi had asked, her voice rising with each second of silence. Aliyah only shook her head. I don't know. She said she had to go back and get her goggles. Coach Brian said he'd help her find them." Naomi froze. She rushed to the car, Aliyah still in her arms, and drove back to Summit Pines, tires screeching as she pulled into the near-empty parking lot. A staff member at the front desk smiled, as if nothing was wrong. "We saw the girls leave around 4:30 together," she said with a shrug. But that was a lie. Surveillance footage was grainy, outdated, and incomplete. The last visible image of Amira was of her entering the locker room. No exit recorded, no further sightings. Naomi called Marcus. The police was summoned, officers combed the building. Locker rooms, storage closets, equipment rooms, nothing. The outdoor grounds were searched, nearby creeks and wooded trails. Helicopters circled the area for days. But Amira was gone, erased, it seemed, from the fabric of the world. In those first few days, the Thompsons didn't sleep. Naomi sat at the edge of Aliyah's bed, holding the remaining twin close to her chest, trying to listen for the beat of two hearts in the place where there was now only one. The community initially rallied, posters, phone trees, volunteers. But as days turned to weeks and weeks into months, the media grew tired, attention faded, and the collective hope dimmed. Naomi did not rest. She began recording every interaction she remembered between her daughters and Calloway. She documented every strange glance, every odd schedule change, every offhand comment. She filed complaints to the Aquatic Center, to the city's recreation board, to the state licensing office. Each response was the same: insufficient evidence. "Coach Calloway is a respected professional," one official had said. "Accusations like these can ruin a man's life." As if Amira's life wasn't already ruined. As if she still had one. 5 years passed, then 10. Naomi aged in ways no one could see but everyone could feel. She grew quieter, colder. Her marriage strained under the weight of unspeakable loss. Aaliyah, meanwhile, had become a mirror cracked down the middle. She was still bright, still kind, but never whole. The bond between the twins had been spiritual, unspoken, and inseparable. With Amira gone, Aaliyah carried only half a soul. And yet, she persisted. She studied child psychology, earned scholarships, and eventually moved to Atlanta to become a trauma counselor for underprivileged youth. "I want to help kids who never get listened to," she told Naomi on her graduation day. Naomi simply nodded, unable to form words through the weight in her throat. And then came the fall of 2015. Aaliyah was invited to speak at a university in Macon, a lecture titled "Invisible Wounds: How We Fail Children Who Speak in Silence." Naomi hesitated when she heard the news. "Do you really want to go back there?" she asked. Aaliyah gave her a soft smile. "I need to, for her." The night before her presentation, Aaliyah called her mother. They spoke for 23 minutes. Naomi remembered exactly because she had glanced at the clock every other minute, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. "He called me," Aaliyah said suddenly toward the end of the call. "Who?" Naomi asked, but she already knew. "Coach Calloway. He said he has something to tell me. Something about that day." Naomi's blood turned to ice. "Baby, no. I just want to know, Mom. I need to know." Naomi tried to argue, but Aaliyah was calm. Too calm. She hung up with a promise to call again in the morning. That call never came. Aaliyah was last seen on hotel security cameras at 10:31 p.m. walking into the parking lot with a tote bag and her phone in hand. She never came back. When Naomi received the news, she didn't cry. Her hands went cold, her breath slowed, and the world narrowed to a pinpoint of white-hot clarity. "It was him," she said aloud, not to anyone, but to herself. He took them both. The next day, Naomi opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years and unfolded a manila folder. Inside were notes, timelines, diagrams, hand-drawn maps, and a list of all the places Calloway had worked since leaving Macon. She had kept track. She had always kept track. Because deep down, Naomi Thompson never believed her daughter had simply vanished. She knew monsters didn't live under the bed. They lived behind pool whistles and practiced smiles, and this time she wasn't going to wait for the world to catch up. This time she was going to open the door herself and face the horror that had stolen both her daughters. The Macon Police Department reopened the file on Aaliyah Thompson within hours of the missing persons report being filed, and this time, unlike 1992, there was immediate national attention. The words "second daughter gone" appeared in red across morning news tickers. Naomi, sitting alone on her porch with a blanket across her lap and her daughter's last voicemail replaying in her ears, stared into the growing dark like it owed her answers. But she knew the police would be too slow, too careful, too polite. That's why she drove, just 3 days later, to the old Summit Pines Aquatic Center, now abandoned and fenced off, a hollowed-out shell of bricks and mildew. A "for sale" sign hung at an angle, like it had given up. Naomi didn't ask for permission. She used bolt cutters and entered through the rear fence, a flashlight tucked under her arm and a recorder in her coat pocket. She hadn't stepped inside in over 2 decades, but the smell was exactly the same: chlorine, rust, and something rotten beneath the surface. In the back, near the utility corridor, was the place she had always suspected. A massive industrial water filtration unit, once used for the lap pools, still sat intact. She remembered hearing rumors back in '93 from one of the janitors about Calloway's obsession with chemical control and how he'd insisted only he should handle it. At the time, it sounded like a professional quirk. Now it sounded like a locked door waiting to be opened. Naomi stood in front of the tank, staring at the blue steel surface. Scratches along the rim. A faint discoloration around the drainage seal. She took a shaky breath and placed a call. Not to the police, but to someone she'd kept in contact with over the years, a retired private investigator named Randall Pierce, one of the few who had believed her back then. "I need you in Macon, now," she said. Within 24 hours, Randall arrived with excavation tools, a pair of drones, and a forensic contact who still owed him a favor. When they opened the filtration unit on October 3rd, 2015, time stood still. Naomi didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She watched, stone-faced, as forensic specialists pulled from the tank 2 small forms wrapped in heavy-duty plastic and duct tape, preserved nearly perfectly due to the sealed, anaerobic conditions. A necklace she had given Amira for her 8th birthday hung around the first body's neck. The second wore Aaliyah's denim jacket, the one she'd been wearing when she left the hotel, and beside them, lying in the slime and sediment, was an old Panasonic VHS camcorder sealed in a waterproof bag. There were 3 cassettes, each labeled in smudged handwriting, March 1992, July 1992, September 2015. The silence in the evidence room was total. When Naomi was shown the stills, she only asked to see one frame, the last image of Aaliyah alive. Her daughter was seated in a chair, eyes wide, tears brimming, as a television screen behind her played grainy footage of another girl, her sister, screaming. Naomi closed the folder and said nothing. She simply placed it down and walked out of the room. Meanwhile, the hunt for Calloway began. Facial recognition was deployed, border alerts sent out. It turned out the man had reinvented himself again, this time as Liam Foster, a swim coach in Austin, Texas, working under the table at a private summer training camp for elite athletes. He had darkened his hair, grown a beard, and claimed to be a Canadian national with a spotless background. But he had slipped. A parent had taken a photo with him during a championship meet and posted it online. The system matched the face within hours. On October 6, 2015, federal agents surrounded the facility and arrested him in front of a group of teenage swimmers. He denied everything, said they had the wrong man, that he'd never heard of the Thompsons, never been to Georgia. But once he was shown the footage, the one with his voice, his face, his laugh, he broke. During a series of interviews that spanned 3 days, Calloway finally confessed to both murders. Amira had died, he claimed, by accident when he tried to discipline her for not following instructions. He panicked and used the filtration tank as a hiding place. When Aaliyah contacted him in 2015, he said, "The fear came rushing back." He lured her in with promises of closure, then eliminated her too, afraid that her profession and trauma expertise might help her remember what her child mind had suppressed all those years ago. His words were clinical, emotionless. He spoke like a man explaining a broken pipe. Naomi refused to attend the trial, but she followed every detail through Randall's updates. The prosecution played parts of the tapes in court, only brief clips, enough to make the jury weep, enough to make headlines scream. Calloway's defense tried to argue insanity, coercion, even false memory. But it was futile. On December 11, 2015, Brian Calloway was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years. He was sent to Warden State Prison in northern Georgia under maximum security and solitary conditions. But Naomi wasn't done. Justice on paper was never enough for a mother who'd buried both daughters within weeks of finding their bones. Over the next several months, she made quiet inquiries into the prison system. She dusted off her old credentials, got approvals for a long-term behavioral study on violent offenders, and submitted a request to visit Warden under academic pretenses. Her application was approved. On February 2, 2016, she met Calloway face-to-face. He was older, grayer, but still had the same cold smile. "Dr. Thompson," he said, "fancy seeing you here." She didn't flinch. "I'm here for the truth," she replied. "Let's begin." Over the next year, she visited him every 2 weeks, each time offering him herbal tea she brewed herself. Each time, he accepted. The tea was laced, very gradually, with microdoses of digitoxin, a plant-based cardiac glycoside. In small amounts, it mimics heart failure. In tiny doses over time, it's nearly impossible to trace. By the winter of 2017, Calloway had begun complaining of dizziness, chest pain, fatigue. Doctors blamed stress and confinement. Naomi continued the dosing. On March 13, 2017, exactly 25 years to the day since Amira's murder, Brian Calloway was found dead in his cell. Cause of death: sudden cardiac arrest. Case closed. Naomi sat at home that evening, lit a candle between her daughter's photos, and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Then she got to work. She launched the Amira and Aaliyah Foundation the following month, with the mission to advocate for missing children of color, combat predatory abuse in athletic institutions, and reform the background check protocols nationwide. Her story went viral. She testified before Congress. By 2020, 5 states had passed Aaliyah's law, requiring dual camera coverage in all minor locker rooms and criminal background checks for all private athletic contractors. Naomi never once mentioned how Calloway had died. She never needed to. The world had already decided it was justice. She had only delivered the echo. When the footage was finally digitized and catalogued, it was done in silence. The kind of silence only institutions understand. Government labs with no windows, no sound, but the quiet tapping of keyboards, technicians with faces locked in neutral as horrors flickered across monitors. The tapes recovered from the tank behind Summit Pines Aquatic Center were physically degraded but salvageable. Tape 1, labeled March 1992, began with seemingly benign training sessions. Calloway instructing children on breaststroke techniques, adjusting goggles, praising form. But then the tone changed. The lighting dimmed, the setting moved from the pool deck to a tiled storage room in the back wing, adjacent to the pump housing. What followed were recordings of isolated sessions. Children led one by one into that space, always under the pretense of private coaching. Calloway had positioned the camera discreetly, filming from behind stacked boxes, or occasionally propping it on a metal shelf angled toward the child. The tapes didn't just expose physical abuse, they chronicled a chilling psychological manipulation. On screen, Amira, barely 8, was seen hesitating, flinching, as Calloway spoke in a low, instructive voice. "You want to be great, don't you?" "Greatness requires trust," he murmured. Her face was caught between confusion and fear, an expression that, once seen, could never be unseen. In one clip, Amira looked directly at the camera, as if she knew it was there, as if she was begging whoever would eventually watch to see her. Tape 2, July 1992, was more disturbing. Naomi had to be physically restrained when she entered the room where this footage was reviewed. Though she insisted on being present, the lead investigator warned her. "This is not for justice, this is survival." The second tape captured what investigators would later confirm was the day Amira died. She was left alone in the room for over 20 minutes before Calloway entered with a towel and a duffel bag. What happened next was not a moment of rage, it was planned. Calloway's voice was calm. He instructed Amira to kneel, to recite what he called her oath of silence. She resisted. The audio picked up her repeated pleas, "I want to go home." He struck her once, then again. The third impact wasn't shown, only the sound and the sudden shift in the camera's focus as it tilted, falling forward. Investigators believed that was the moment she lost consciousness. The screen turned to static a few minutes later. Then came the third tape. September 2015. Naomi was not permitted to view it until the forensic team had fully vetted its contents. It began with Calloway sitting in the same room, now older, greyer, the room redesigned, but familiar. Aaliyah entered on her own, carrying a notebook and a manila folder. She appeared composed, but cautious. Calloway handed her a VHS tape and gestured to a small TV set already prepared. "You should see it," he said. The camera, again hidden, recorded her reactions as she watched the 1992 footage of her sister. She trembled. Her lips moved, forming her sister's name like a prayer. Tears spilled down her cheeks. When she turned to him, her face was filled, not with fear, but fury. She stood, She shouted. She reached for her phone. The footage blurred for a moment, then showed Calloway lunging. The struggle was short. Aaliyah hit the floor with a dull thud. After that, the camera ran for over an hour in eerie silence. The screen darkened gradually as the room's single overhead bulb flickered out. That footage was the keystone of the prosecution's case. It proved beyond doubt that Calloway had committed premeditated murder in 2015 and that he had revisited the same rituals of power and silence he had first enacted decades before. But beyond the court, beyond the headlines, the real consequences of the tapes lived in every parent who saw their own child in Amira's fear, in Aaliyah's courage, and in Naomi's collapse. In the months following Calloway's sentencing and subsequent death, Naomi became both martyr and legend within advocacy circles. Survivors wrote her letters. Communities of color across the South began organizing local watchdog groups. One mother in Alabama said, "She did what the system never could. She made it feel personal." The Amira and Aaliyah Foundation grew from a small outreach center in Macon to a national organization with chapters in 20 states. Naomi refused interviews, turned down documentaries, and declined all network offers. She said the story wasn't about her. "It's about the places we pretend are safe," she once said in a rare public speech. "Pools, classrooms, churches, homes. Safety, for some of us, has always been conditional." Privately, she met with other parents of missing children, especially black families, who often received less media attention, fewer resources, and more skepticism from law enforcement. She would sit in circles with them, offering not platitudes but power. She showed them how to build files, how to keep records, how to ask questions that made people uncomfortable, how to never, ever stop digging, but she never stopped grieving. Grief, for Naomi, wasn't a wave, it was a climate. And yet, in that grief, she found purpose. On the 1-year anniversary of Aaliyah's death, she planted 2 trees in her backyard, one cherry blossom, one magnolia. She called them the Sisters. Each spring they bloomed just days apart. The foundation published a manual titled The Tank, based on the true investigation process that uncovered the crimes. It was distributed across school districts, athletic associations, and police departments. A copy was sent to every state senator. It became required reading in 2 states. By 2018, 3 new federal bills had been drafted with language inspired directly by Naomi's advocacy. Meanwhile, whispers about Calloway's death began to rise, rumors of poetic revenge, of justice done right. Some conspiracy blogs speculated Naomi had orchestrated the death. Some even praised her, but no charges were ever filed. Official cause, heart failure, end of story. Naomi, when asked, would only smile faintly and say, "Sometimes the world evens itself out." Then she'd change the subject. In the background, her work continued. More children were found, more predators exposed. And in every story, her name became a quiet promise that silence could be broken, that hidden crimes could be unearthed, and that even when justice failed, a mother's truth would find its way to the surface. Long before the world knew the name Brian Calloway as the face of one of the most horrific child abuse cases in modern American history, he was just Coach Brian, a friendly, clean-cut white man with sun-kissed arms, soft eyes, and a voice that never rose above a calm instructional tone. At Summit Pines Aquatic Center, he was known as the Kid Whisperer, someone who could get shy children to float, smile, and dive headfirst into deep water without hesitation. Parents adored him, kids feared him in silence. And that contradiction, the dissonance between his public image and the private terror he imposed, was exactly what had made him so dangerous for so long. After his death, a deeper investigation into Calloway's life revealed that Macon wasn't where his sickness began, nor had it ended there. From college swim meets in Tennessee to youth training camps in North Carolina, and eventually to his long disappearance under the alias Liam Foster in Texas, his history was marked by short contracts, sudden resignations, and vague disputes that no one had ever pursued seriously. The timeline reconstructed by the Amira and Aaliyah Foundation showed that in nearly every place Calloway had worked, There had been complaints, not always formal, not always loud, but they were there, notes passed between mothers, teachers whispering about how he seems too close, children refusing to go to practice without ever explaining why. The problem wasn't that there were no signs, the problem was that no one followed them. In 2001, a mother in Charlotte had written a letter to the director of a private swim club stating that her 10-year-old son came home visibly shaken after one-on-one training sessions with Coach Calloway. The club reviewed the complaint internally and determined it to be inconclusive. Calloway left 2 months later. In 2009, a family in Houston accused a man fitting Calloway's new identity, Liam Foster, of photographing their daughter at a community pool without permission, but with no clear evidence and no last name to attach to the report, the claim went nowhere. The man vanished. By the time he resurfaced in Austin, he had cultivated an entirely new persona, a quiet widower from Nova Scotia, claiming to be a former Canadian Olympic team assistant, now living off-grid and offering elite swim mentorship. He chose communities on the edge of cities, often places with little regulation and overworked enforcement. He targeted children whose families couldn't afford expensive coaches, especially children of color. The predator had become a ghost with a perfectly polished smile. Back in Macon, while law enforcement continued to unravel the scope of Calloway's crimes, Naomi Thompson had begun another quiet project. It wasn't about Calloway, it wasn't about the court system, it was about the forgotten ones, the children who vanished without headlines, whose parents never made it on the 6 o'clock news, whose names didn't trend, whose faces weren't printed on milk cartons. Through her foundation, Naomi started compiling what she called the Silent Files, a digital archive of missing children of color dating back to the 1970s. The patterns were undeniable. Lower-income families received slower response times. Reports filed by black mothers were statistically less likely to result in Amber Alerts being issued. Investigations stalled, the media coverage was thin. The result? Whole generations of vanished children whose stories had no closure. Naomi's team used AI analysis and old-school shoe-leather detective work to connect these cases. They found clusters, towns where coaches moved frequently, churches with rotating volunteers, temporary foster homes with no long-term oversight. And in at least 4 other cities, the trail led back to men connected to Calloway, former teammates, colleagues, or protégés. It became clear that Calloway wasn't an anomaly. He was a thread in a much darker tapestry. One name stood out, Douglas Reeve, a swim instructor in Birmingham, Alabama, who had briefly overlapped with Calloway in 1995. He too had moved often, and like Calloway, had glowing recommendations with only whispers of suspicion trailing behind him. Naomi alerted the authorities, but she didn't stop there. She traveled to Birmingham herself, met with local parents, held a closed-door seminar, and taught them what she had learned the hardest way possible, how to see through charm, how to trust your child's silences, and how to document everything. 3 months later, Reeve was arrested after a whistleblower came forward with evidence of abuse spanning over a decade. Naomi didn't take credit. She never wanted it. What she wanted was prevention, not vengeance. Her daughter Aliyah had once said, "Healing isn't just about what happened, it's about what we stop from happening next." Naomi lived those words now, breathing them into every family she met, every forum she joined, every lawmaker she pressured. The media often referred to her as the mother who brought down a monster. But those who knew her called her something else, the Watcher, because she watched for the children no one else noticed. She watched the way certain coaches smiled too much, how certain directors dodged questions, how certain institutions hid behind bureaucracy. She watched and remembered. And in that watching, she became what so many others needed, a witness who refused to forget. But even Naomi had limits. In the fall of 2020, she collapsed during a panel in Atlanta. Doctors told her the cancer had returned. She didn't panic. She didn't tell anyone beyond her closest circle. "I've done what I came here to do," she told Randall Pierce, her longtime friend and private investigator. "Now I just want to go home." Home was a modest single-story house in Macon, surrounded by tall grass and the 2 trees she had planted, Amira, the magnolia, Aaliyah, the cherry blossom. She spent her last weeks writing letters to other grieving mothers, to survivors, to school boards. She left one final request in her will, that she be buried between her daughters in the same cemetery where she once knelt and whispered their names to the earth. On February 12, 2021, Naomi Thompson passed away in her sleep. The morning news ran tributes. Her foundation issued a statement. But in hundreds of living rooms across America, families who had once been alone in their grief now wept together for a woman who had carried all of their pain like a torch through the darkness. At her funeral, a little girl who had once been coached by Calloway and rescued by Naomi's outreach stood up during the service. Her voice trembled as she said, "She didn't just save me, she believed me." And in that small, trembling voice, Naomi's legacy was sealed, not in the courtroom, not in the documentaries, but in the quiet power of belief. A belief that monsters can be unmasked, that buried truth can rise, that even in death, a mother's love never stops fighting. They say grief becomes manageable with time, that the pain dulls, that memories soften, that eventually those left behind return to something resembling life. But for the families Naomi Thompson had stood beside, grief never dulled, it sharpened into purpose. In the months following her death, the Amira and Aaliyah Foundation became more than a tribute. It became a movement. Fueled by Naomi's notes, audio recordings, and the unfinished proposals she had drafted even from her hospital bed, the foundation launched a national initiative titled EchoNet, a centralized digital platform for families of missing Black and brown children. It allowed users to upload photos, timelines, behavioral reports, school files, witness statements, and even voice notes from loved ones. Each case received a unique Echo ID and an assigned advocate from a growing volunteer force that included retired detectives, trauma therapists, and journalists. The aim was clear: no child should ever disappear quietly again. Within a year, EchoNet had flagged patterns across 3 southern states: disappearances near church summer programs, gaps in youth sports background checks, names that appeared in multiple towns under different aliases. And just as Naomi had predicted, the connections began to surface. In Tallahassee, Florida, a 17-year-old intern working for the foundation cross-referenced swim program rosters from the 90s with missing persons databases. She found a name, Deshaun Price, a 10-year-old boy who had vanished in 1996 after attending a week-long aquatic camp run by a now-defunct group called the Gulfstream League. The coach listed for that session, a man named Stephen Calloway, Brian Calloway's cousin. Investigators had never made the link, but Naomi's groundwork, the blueprint she had left behind, made sure others could. The foundation handed the case to the Florida Bureau of Investigation, and with renewed pressure from national media, a grand jury was convened. More families came forward. More dots were connected. One by one, the silence began to crack. The country watched as decades-old walls of institutional indifference were shaken by what had begun as one mother's refusal to let her daughters be forgotten. Meanwhile, back in Macon, Georgia, a different kind of ripple was forming. The small town where the nightmare began was trying, slowly, to redeem itself. The old Summit Pines Aquatic Center, long since shuttered, had become a hushed landmark of shame. But after Naomi's passing, the city council voted unanimously to demolish the building and construct in its place a public memorial garden. At its center, a stone sculpture of 2 intertwined trees, one magnolia, one cherry blossom, stood beneath a plaque that read, "To the children who were silenced, you are heard." Families visited, survivors left notes beneath the petals, and in the stillness of that garden, the weight of years gone wrong hung in the air like incense. Yet, even as the nation mourned and mobilized, one question remained unanswered. What if Naomi's reach had gone further than anyone realized? What if, in her final act, she had left behind not just a foundation, not just reforms, but something more private, something only a few people would ever know existed? The answer came in a sealed envelope. Randall Pierce, the private investigator who had worked with Naomi since Amira's disappearance, received a package 2 months after her death. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a USB drive, and a black and white photograph. The photo was of a small girl, maybe 5 years old, standing beside a pool, grinning wide with missing front teeth. Her name was Kiara, Naomi's letter began. She was never on the news. Her mother spoke broken English and was told to wait her turn at the precinct. No one ever followed up. The rest of the letter outlined a detailed timeline of Kiara's last known movements in 2006, when she'd attended a swim orientation at a recreational centre outside Birmingham. The coach assigned to her class, a man listed as David F., no last name, no file, no inquiry. But Naomi had already found him. He was living in southern Louisiana under yet another alias, running a private camp for children with autism. She had tracked his vehicles, recorded his recruitment ads, and interviewed 3 parents whose children had been pulled from the program after strange behavior. She had documented it all. The USB drive contained audio files, dashcam footage, and surveillance captures Naomi had gathered herself. She ended the letter with a single sentence. "If I don't make it, promise me this one doesn't vanish too." Randall kept his promise. He took the file directly to a national task force affiliated with Homeland Security, and within weeks the man posing as David F. was arrested. His real name was confirmed: David Frayne, another former associate of Calloway from his university swim days. His DNA matched evidence from Kiara's clothes, recovered years earlier but never tested. The case made national headlines. From the grave, a mother saves another child. But Randall knew this wasn't about headlines. It was about the network Naomi had uncovered, piece by piece, case by case. In late 2022, the Department of Justice officially launched a federal unit specializing in crimes against missing children of color, modeled in part after the Amira and Aliyah Foundation's methods. They named the program Project Sister Watch. Naomi's name was included in the opening dedication, read aloud before Congress. Her story had reached the very halls where, decades earlier, doors had remained closed to people like her. But for the Thompson family, legacy was never about power. It was about memory. Aliyah and Amira's voices, once drowned out by apathy and bureaucracy, now echoed through every hotline, every Amber Alert, every whispered call from a desperate parent who just needed someone to believe them. Naomi had once written in her private journal, "What if justice isn't a gavel? What if it's a mother who never stops asking the right questions?" That journal, now on display in a glass case inside the Foundation's Atlanta headquarters, was opened to that exact page. Visitors often pause there longer than anywhere else. Some cry, some nod quietly, some leave with a new understanding of what it means to protect a child. Because in the end, Naomi Thompson didn't just solve a case. She unraveled a system. She gave a name to every unnamed child. She broke the spell of silence that had protected predators for generations. And most of all, she proved that even after death, a mother's whisper can still move mountains. The weight of what had been uncovered, never truly lifted from Macon, Georgia, or from the dozens of other towns and cities that Naomi Thompson's quiet war had touched. Even years after her death, her presence seemed woven into the very infrastructure of reform, into classroom protocols, poolside training programs, police filing systems, and the pages of community handbooks. But the legacy she left behind was not carved solely in law. It lived in the quiet moments: a school counselor who now took a child's whisper seriously, a mother who, upon sensing something off, did not doubt herself, a coach now being watched, not with suspicion, but with responsibility. The world hadn't become safer overnight, but it had become more awake, and Naomi had been the alarm. In 2024, on what would have been Aliyah and Amira's 40th birthday, a commemorative vigil was held at the Blossom Grove Memorial Park, the site built on the grounds of the old Summit Pines Aquatic Center. Hundreds gathered beneath the flowering trees sculpted in their image, and among the speakers was a now adult woman named Janiah Wells, one of the last children Calloway had attempted to recruit during his years in hiding. Her family had pulled her out of a swim camp in Texas because of a bad feeling. She stepped to the microphone, voice steady, and said, "Naomi Thompson never met me, but she still saved me. My mother recognized the signs because someone like her made sure those signs were known." The audience fell silent in reverence. Naomi's portrait, framed in simple gold beside those of her daughters, caught the flickering light of 100 vigil candles. But while the event made local news, something else had been quietly unfolding behind the scenes, something Naomi herself had begun before her illness, and which the Foundation had kept strictly confidential. It was called the Vault. Unlike EchoNet, which was public-facing and intended for families, the Vault was encrypted, private, and deeply investigative. Within it were redacted government memos, flagged court records, archived complaints, and profiles of over 200 individuals who had been named repeatedly across various states but never fully prosecuted. Naomi had known that systems fail by design, that abusers often thrive because they exploit blind spots left by bureaucracy, race bias, and outdated laws. She wanted a map, a long, painful, data-driven map that pointed to the places no one wanted to look. After her passing, the Vault was maintained by a trio of her most trusted colleagues, Randall Pierce, now grey, and slower in step but sharper than ever, Leah Raymond, a former prosecutor turned whistleblower, and Dr. Kaya Harris, a trauma researcher mentored by Naomi herself. Together they began quietly contacting regional law enforcement teams, offering dossiers that couldn't be ignored. Their success was measured not in headlines, but in prevention. School district hires that were quietly denied, after-school programs quietly shut down, licensing offices that, under pressure, rewrote their protocols. Naomi's team never sought credit. They simply sent the files, followed up, and moved on to the next name. But the Vault had one last secret, one Naomi had locked even from Randall until after her death. In a separate folder, titled Final Note, she left an audio recording. Her voice, though thinner than in earlier years, carried its familiar resolve. "If you're hearing this, I've already gone, and I hope I went peacefully. But I need you to know there's one more, one who hid better than the rest." She gave no full name, just initials, RLC. She referenced travel logs, 3 missing children tied by location and dates, and a clinic that once operated under the guise of special needs therapy in Savannah. Naomi had tried to reach the children's families, but died before she could complete the outreach. Randall, Leah, and Kaya picked up the trail. It took nearly 8 months, but they eventually identified the man, Dr. Ray L. Carrington, a former behavioral therapist who had moved through 3 states under different licenses and was now working in a private care facility outside Charleston, South Carolina. They collected testimonies, including from a nurse who had left after seeing things that felt wrong but couldn't be proven. They unearthed settlement agreements, gag orders, non-disclosure contracts, all carefully crafted to bury the truth. With enough evidence, they alerted the FBI. On January 7, 2025, Carrington was arrested. His trial began in June, and in a surreal twist, one of the prosecutors used the phrase Naomi had once scribbled in her journal. "Sometimes justice is just a mother who never stops asking the right questions." The jury found him guilty on all charges. His sentencing included an acknowledgement of the Vault's role in connecting evidence that had remained scattered for decades. It was the first time a U.S. court formally cited a citizen-led archive as a decisive factor in a criminal case involving serial abuse. And so Naomi's story came full circle, not with fireworks, not with vengeance, but with systems that had begun to bend toward protection, with children who were no longer invisible, with silence that now had cracks wide enough for truth to shine through. In the Foundation's headquarters in Atlanta, the original office Naomi once worked from, small, cluttered, always too warm, remains untouched. On her desk lies the same worn notebook, open to her last written entry. "If no one listens, I will still speak. If no one acts, I will still move. If I am gone, then let my work remain." That work now spans every state. Her daughters, whose lives were stolen in shadows, are now immortalized in sunlight. Alia's legacy lives in trauma-informed policy. Amira's name is echoed in early intervention screenings across hundreds of schools. And Naomi, the watcher, the mother, the movement, remains etched into the foundation of a new era, one where no child goes missing without a voice rising behind them. One where grief no longer ends in despair but begins a revolution. One where, when someone says, "She was just a mother," we answer, "Exactly,"